Hello, everyone. Welcome to YASCP, your African Supply Chain Podcast. I am your host, Stela Jaqueta. And in this podcast, we discuss various topics that affect my beautiful, your beautiful, uncomplicated African supply chains. And I just want to shout out to everyone who has listened, subscribed to the podcast. It has really been amazing, the support, and keep it up. And in this episode, we will be talking about, is there hope for the African supply chain? And I have a wonderful guest. And this guest of mine is one of my inspiration when it comes to supply chain, consultancy, and all things supply chain. His name is Adebayo Adeleke. He is a supply chain enthusiast, businessman, social entrepreneur, retired U.S. Army officer, and a global thought leader. That's one of the things that I want to become in life, a global thought leader. He is managing partner at Pantote Solutions LLC in Dallas, Texas, and also the president and CEO of Adebayo Adeleke LLC, a principal partner and senior supply chain consultant for the Epot Consulting Limited, and a lecturer in supply chain management at Sam Houston State University. His profound knowledge and expertise in the fields of risk management and security, supply chain management and logistics, leadership, geopolitics, diversity, and inclusion makes him a positive influence, a thought leader, and generator of authentic ideas and novel scenarios that birth winning experience for individuals, organizations, and governments. Being a seasoned combat veteran in the United States Army with 20 years of experience in the bag, Adebayo is a prime example of how immigrants have been a force in developing, building America, and fighting its wars. Adebayo is passionate about seeing human world that works, a world where visionary leaders, proactive doers, critical thinkers, and knowledge builders drive the economy. And this passion has led him to create Unfettered Podcast, Supply Chain Africa magazine, and Supply Chain Africa podcast. So, wow, as you guys can see, this is a power-packed guest of mine. So I even told him that I brought the big guns here. And Adebayo, thank you very much for being on YASP once again. And we just want to know, how are you doing?
I'm well, Stella, and I wouldn't have it any other way to be here today. And I know the journey. At least you kind of privy me to your journey of becoming a podcaster. And so, welcome on board. Welcome to the community. Let me be the first or second, or how many people have welcomed you to the community. So, it's always a pleasure, and I support your stuff anytime. What you're doing, what you intend to do, and whatever you're doing, I'm always in support. And it's always support of all you guys, repping the supply chain on the continent of Africa. The supply chain in Africa, African supply chain is very near and dear to my heart. So yes, I'm glad to be here amongst every other thing that is going on. We are in the midst of chunking out our second edition of Supply Chain Africa magazine, and in the midst of revamping a lot. We're building our pillars, we're briefing, we want to make sure we enrich our readers, both on the continent and outside the continent. So we have so much, but again, we keep moving, always looking forward,
Oh, no.
always looking forward.
Thank you. Every time I think about, in terms of everything supply chain, any topic, I'm just like, okay, but the bio might have something to say about it. And just to get started, some of our listeners at the bio, they're still not very much integrated into what is really supply chain. Why supply chain? What is that? So can you please just bring us like a brought down version of what is really supply chain in the global terms?
I know supply chain has many meanings to many people, many definitions to many people, but regardless of how to make people understand what supply chain is, uh, in simple terms, supply chain runs the world pretty much. Supply chain
Yeah.
holds the world. So supply chain are all related activities that engages in movement of goods and services from the point of origin to their point of destination. It's very broad, very sweet, very short and sweet, but there's so much in between. Again, it's a bunch of related activities, that is involved in the movement or creation of goods and services from point of origin to the point, the destination, and then from there on out, it also involves them from that point of destination to where it involves recycling and circularity and all those other parts, the reverse side of it, or whatever the materials used in those goods re-enter back into the earth. So all the activities involved in it, is it a procurement, is it a logistics, logistics, transportation and distribution is under logistics. Now, traditionally we used to have three dimensions of supply chain: procurement, we have logistics. Those are the two main pillars that started it, and then we have other supporting casts. But now it has really broadened. Now we have, supply chain. We have cybersecurity, which is huge because everybody's going digital now. We have digitalization. It's part of a huge framework of supply chain. And then we have the supply chain risk management. Is a huge dimension right now because apart from, you got to look at the path at which your supplies, goods and services are moved from point A to point B. So there's so many dimensions that are in between. So when we talk about related activities, every activity that is involved to bring your goods from the point of origin to the destination, which is the consumer, and then from the destination back to the materials re-entering the heart, and then being reused, and all those, circularity and sustainability is huge part of our supply chain. So what we traditionally load as global supply chain has really changed. So I hope that clarifies it a bit.
Yes, you sounded just like what you said. It makes the world go around. It's really what is the driving force of making the world go around. And Adebayo, just going on to even my next question, connecting with the definition of supply chains, and you have that global perspective in terms of U.S. Army. You also have a global perspective in terms of other continents. Why would you say? How different is the African supply chain? What is actually the African supply chain? How is that different from the rest of the world?
Yeah, so I'm of the opinion, and I think a lot of people share my opinion as well, that Africa, our culture, our landscape, is very unique in nature. We have a lot of nuances that's not normally found in other supply chains. Western culture has a huge influence on Western supply chains, which is oftentimes what we practice in Africa. So African supply chain is kind of the intersection between the norms, the cultural norms, the uniqueness and the nuances of African culture into African supply chains. Oftentimes, certain things that are obtainable in Africa, you never find it in the Western world. So Africa, and most people always have difficulty believing that African supply chain doesn't work because they want it to work from the high of the Western culture or the Eastern culture. But understanding African nuances, understanding the processes involved. And then there's another part of African supply chain as well that we are currently exploring, which is going to come out in several articles I'm going to be writing. I'm going to say it on your podcast for the first time.
Ooh.
So I'll be defining
exclusive.
It is exclusive. I'll be defining indigenous supply chain. So in my appetite for better content about African supply chain, make me discover what is called indigenous supply chain, which is a lot of processes that originated from Africa. That the pyramids in Egypt and all these great things that has happened over on the continent didn't just happen by accident. For you to build those pyramids of Egypt, somebody has to do procurement, somebody has to do of those materials used, and most of some of those things that were used, they weren't original to Egypt as well. So it has to be brought far and wide from different parts of the world. So you can be rest assured that there's some indigenous supply chain. But oftentimes, because of westernization and colonization, depending on how you want to see it, a lot of this thing has been submerged. And oftentimes, but it's very intrinsic in our culture. So in my process of research is to find out what are these processes that has been submerged over the course of time, and how can we bring them out to enhance already kind of confused African supply chain, because we have our own ways of life, and then we bring all these new ideology from the Western world And oftentimes, most of this thing doesn't work effectively on the continent. So that is, from my perspective, African supply chain. It has its own uniqueness and nuances that's never found in any other part of Africa, any other
Yeah.
part of the world.
No, that's very true. That even when during my years in university, I was doing research in terms of the physical distribution challenges in Africa, there is the common ones that you find where like road transportation, infrastructure, access to finance, all of that. You can see it brush through many of the countries, but there are nuances in terms of something that is very specific for a country, for example, like Mozambique, and something that is very specific for a country just like Zambia. So in each country, yes, we do have those common challenges, but there's something that is still nuanced, and it's to that culture. For example, in terms of language, something that is actually very a high priority, which is language. In terms here in Mozambique, we speak Portuguese, and our countries next to us, they all speak English. So in terms of communication and how we deal with our suppliers, language can be a barrier, but for a country that is mainly surrounded by other English countries, might not be a barrier. So in terms of that, I really echo what you're saying in terms of having nuances in terms of our African supply chains. And Adebayo, we often hear that African supply chains are fragmented. They are fragmented, and we don't have enough demand in order to bring all our products. Do you consider that true, that really our African supply chains are fragmented, or can we actually flow naturally? It's just a misunderstanding that other cultures or other economies have of us.
I think it's a misunderstanding of it. Yes, if you're looking at it from Western optics, it is fragmented. Absolutely. Actually, chaos is a complete chaos in most instances. But if you look at it there's a lot at play here. You're trying to bring a system that is foreign to people that are very entrenched in their culture and their new, and their cultural norms. So it's gonna sound fragmented, but it can easily flow as well. You can actually get it flowed from point A to point B, and I think a lot of people are working. But there's a lot that helps in flowing of goods and services. There's education, there's knowledge management of what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, or people are not properly trained on what you're doing, it's gonna be there's going to be fragmentation, and as well, and also there are a lot of things at the national level that helps easy movement of goods and services, like road infrastructure, bridges, dams, and all these things that normal people of society cannot create by themselves. They need a huge government, they need a huge investment to make those happen. So any time you have infrastructural issue, especially logistical infrastructure issue, that will be fragmented supply chains, because it just doesn't work. If you have fragmented supply chain, then it's going to be extremely difficult to trade, because you can't trade without those machineries in place. So yes, you can look at it, but can it be better? Absolutely, absolutely. So yes, there is. If you look at it from even if you look at it from African point of view as well, it's very, very fragmented, because I think we are used to our culture has been modified in a way that we are used to certain things being done certain ways now. So we can as well say that in our modified African culture, it's still fragmented. Absolutely.
Yes. And in terms of looking that now we have a lot of China investment. Recently, there was the conference happened in Tunisia, Japan as well. And we see other countries like the U.S. also pitching in and wanting to invest a lot in terms of our African supply chain and African economies. Do you think that will help in terms of bringing and closing those gaps in the fragments, or are they here for their own interest? And we know that we are very rich in terms of resources, of natural resources and extraction. But do you think with all of these foreign investments from China, from Russia, from Japan, and it seems like they're also competing between each other to get, ahead of it and wanted to get and see the African opportunities and extract what they need to extract. But do you think that their interest in us, will it help us in terms of closing those fragments, or do you think that we will still be fragmented if something doesn't change?
I think if it's properly done and properly orchestrated uh, and well planned out, it will work, because most of this infrastructure that's been built oftentimes is for them to drive out resources out of the land for your own good. So if you kind of get them to do the project that really benefits you and also benefit them as well, then it's a win-win. Of course, it's going to smoothen out the fragmentation. And more importantly, nobody does anything for free. All these countries that are coming in there do that as well. So, you come in with one, that kind of a thing. So it's, I don't see, I mean, it's a win-win. It's a win-win for them. I get what I want. You get what you want. So, business world, nothing goes for free. No, actually, nothing is free.
Yeah.
Even I'm a Christian. Even the blood of Jesus is not free.
Yeah.
So there's nothing free. So if somebody's giving you something, they have to have something in exchange. And a lot of other countries are doing so because some of the resources that they need from Africa to feed their population or to enhance their industrial complexes are not present in their country. So they have to go, and you can't just do it without bringing something in hand, because nobody's just going to be like, I need your gold. Okay.
Yeah.
What are you going to get in return? So absolutely. So all this money that you're throwing around is not free.
Yeah.
Absolutely not free.
And just to touch, for example, we have the situation of, if I'm not, it's Congo, where they have one of the largest world supplies of battery of cobalt that is used for making battery for the electrical cars. Do you think that in order for us as Africa, as an African market, to gain our power, to gain our presence, to gain our voice in terms of the global market and contribute heavily to the global GDP, do you think we need to be stronger in terms of our approach? Because again, we hold the natural resources that make this industry go around. Do you think that we need to hold in terms of power as private sector, as government, and say, okay, enough is enough? When are you actually going to bring something to this side that is actually going to leave something that our industries are going to grow about? Or do you think we're still on the way, we still don't have the resources to actually foster this kind of industries?
I think we do. I think it takes a very, very bold leadership to be able to transform these things. There's nothing stopping us from trading with the world, or at the same time bettering ourselves. But what we've always seen in the past with some of these things is that we're trading with the world, and then everybody else is getting shafted along the way. So you can't. I mean, you can't really isolate yourself. The world has been global since. You can't really isolate yourself from some of these things, right? So you get what you want. At the same time, they get what they want out, but in very sustainable manner. So it's not, because of what I've been hearing, which I'm still trying to get a deep dive into DRC. What I'm getting is a lot of people are suffering in the expense. People are really suffering the expense of this corporate. And I'm like, it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. Why should I have to suffer? Why should they, Congolese have to suffer because of exploitation or whatnot? And those are the areas that we have to do better with. Of course, it's going to be beyond the scope of, when I start talking on Congo, it's going to be beyond the scope of this podcast.
Yeah.
There's so much to unearth and unleash on that. But let me just paraphrase it and saying that both can be done. We cannot isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. Yes, the world is looking at us as the next frontier, an African supply chain. In some corridors, we are, breadbasket of the world. In some, we are not. But we provide the world certain resources that are needed for the rest of the world is functioning. If Africa don't produce it and the rest of the world is imbalanced, Africa will be the one taking the brunt of the hit in the long run anyway. So if you look at it in a grand scheme of things, it's better for us to posture right, to make sure that we're in the control of these elements and of these resources, and be able to negotiate something that is a win-win for both, so that no one is being hurt in the whole process. And that's what I've seen over the 10 and decades of what this has been going on. Somebody's being exploited where the other party is gaining tremendously.
Yes, no, definitely. And Adebayo, we see that now, I'm not sure if it's a trend or if it's just something that happened during COVID time. where some countries began to nationalize their industry or bring back their operations. And I was actually watching this video. They were talking about the deglobalization of certain industries, bringing them back to their home countries. And we know that Africa also relies on some of the multinationals to, with their factories and their productions, to be here. Do you think this trend will continue growing of deglobalization and some of the industry, some of the multinationals removing their production centers in some of the African countries? Or do you think it's just something that happened during COVID time and now we're back to normal business?
It's a knee-jerk reaction. It is not to solve the problem. But in some ends, in short term, it might kind of appease you, but in the long term, it's not, because at the end, people still want to cut costs. When you start nearshoring, as they call it, in the process of deglobalization, when you start nearshoring, are people willing to pay price for this amount of commodity you're saying? So when people start realizing that the cost of this thing is unbearable to some of their consumers, it's going to be very extremely hard to get a bit. So all this deglobalization that you're saying it always happens. It's very cyclical in nature. Events happen. People have to rethink about their profit and how they pivot, their sustainability of the organization, and then they'll take certain steps. And then 10 years from now, something great is going to come up. There's a fight for Africa right now. Everybody will try to invest in that fight. Some of the, conditions might not be, might not be right, but they will work through it to make sure they get the necessary resources out of it. But the world we live in today is going to be very hard to deglobalize. The world as we know it, the resources to function as a country doesn't come solely from your country. You have to depend on others.
Yes.
So the globalization can only go so far in some areas, that also commodities that were allowed. But for the rest of it, I don't see it being sustainable effort.
Yes, no, definitely. And I was reading even one of the articles that you wrote in terms of how our imports are higher when it comes from the other Western economies rather than our fellow African countries within. And there was another talk show that I watched where for someone, they wanted to fly to Morocco. They had to fly all the way to Portugal in order to go to Morocco. So these are the challenges that we're still having within us, and yes, it's something that comes and goes in terms of the deglobalization. But I think it's really time for us to look at trading and increasing trade with each other. And rather than having a product that is costing twice coming from another African countries, we prefer to import from China because it's cheaper and it comes as a reliable time. And I think it's time for us as African and business people and supply chain professionals to really realize and capitalize on that. And that brings me to my next question, which is the golden goose, I can say, or the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. That is something that is on the works and has been implemented, but it's still in the initial phase. So Adebayo, I know that you're an enthusiast and you know about this deal. So can you please explain to our audience, like what is actually, for someone who has never heard, this is the first time they're hearing about the African Free Continental Trade Agreement. What is that? What are the main goals? What it seeks to do actually, and how the private sector can benefit from it?
It's a lot. It's a lot. And people that actually architect this agreement, they're still talking about it. So there's no way I can do this thing in justice in a few minutes. But Continental Future Agreement is an effort, it's an initiative to kind of unite African economy under one, to have one economy, the use of, tariff system, trading should be kind of optimized, and also the monetary system be tariffed so that Africa can actually trade among itself. There's a lot that needs to happen for this to actually be actualized. It's a great dream, and I think if it happens, it will be great for Africa. Africa will be unite. Africa will unite, just like Bob Marley's song. That will unite on that front. But for this to actually happen, it takes a concerted effort of each member state of the African be able to make it work, because there is no sense of having, you know, they have time and then everybody's doing their own thing. Nobody's actually working towards it. Look at all the trade agreements in the world, like the one we have. EU has now become a whole block now, and they had to work towards it to make it work for them. EU in the 80s is not what EU is now. They're more powerful. They're more, you know, they're more united in a way, and they speak with one voice. It's very, very difficult in Africa to speak with one voice, and that could be one of the big challenges going on, because you know, I believe in African Union. It has to be a you know, a concerted and unified effort to pass most of these agreements. But you know, you take 3 or 4 countries other, to counter whatever initiative is, that's pretty much the initiative will be derailed. You know, it uphill battle, but it's doable to get Africa to work as one. And for this to happen, we have to work as one. Of course, you mentioned the language barrier earlier. That's one part. There's a lot of nuances. Africans are very, very interesting, and I think the more we kind of use this kind of initiative to bond us together, the better we get out of this initiative. You guys are in SEDEC, right? South African Development Communities.
Yeah.
The way you guys is completely different from the guys in ECOWAS or the other part of the world. So it's easier to actualize guys in SEDEC, because it takes a while for you guys to actually, the current situation of SEDEC is completely different from about 30 years ago, right?
True.
Exactly. So it takes time for you to work. And I think, I mean, it's my own opinion. I think, you know, if we kind of take this African initiative in chunks, let's work SEDEC first, let's work ECOWAS first, North Africa, and then we start to pull everything together, I think we'll gain a better result, because your challenges in SEDEC is different. Guys that are, you know, you guys partner, I mean, you guys are Pacific, Indian Ocean, all kind of stuff going on over there. Guys in the North and the Mediterranean have different challenges. Of course, the guys in West Africa has the Atlantic they are kind of dealing with. So everyone has their own nuances, and we don't, you know, so you can't really have some generalistic or common ground issues across, but maybe there are, you know. So, but I think it's an awesome goal. It's an awesome goal. It would be great if the whole continent can work as one. We can break down those tariff barriers. Our road system are interconnected. They are working. Our waterways are open to each other, and you know, we can interpret different languages. You know, on our tariffs, we can beat down less tariffs on different countries, and we can generate demand. We can, because demand signal drives everything. It drives supply. Everyone is enslaved to demand, you know. So the reason why import has always been, the import and export has always been skewed in most African countries, is because we don't take pride in our products. And over time, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we don't take pride in our product, because we don't, I mean, in not to be comparable to the other part of the world. So people rather prefer to get it from that part of the world that has been refined than to get from their neighboring nation. So, you know, it took us a while to get to where we are right now. It's going to take us a while to reverse those things. But we have to trust our demand that's coming from different parts of the world, and we have to trust those products that are coming out of it. But it takes a while to get there. It's not something that's going to be done.
That's true.
Because Kenyan coffee is good, that doesn't mean that Switzerland coffee that I'm importing, you know, I'm going to stop it. I have to make sure I'll continue to Switzerland coffee until I realize that Kenyan coffee has kind of moved to par to where, because a lot of, you know, Africans we're very interested when it comes to taste and product. Oh, this thing is this thing is that, you know. We expect a lot out of production, our money that we used to buy to consume these goods, right? And African goods, at least currently, a lot of people have, you know, they say they'll fall short of it. You know, people imagine, you know, like, oh, where is this coffee from? Is it from, you know, Switzerland or some, you know, like, oh no, it's from Kenya. Kenya? I'm not going to drink Kenya coffee, you know. We've not been eyes and taking pride in some of the product that comes out of the continent. I think that in itself, reorientation of Africans into having pride in who we are, in our product, in our ways of life, in our processes, makes a huge difference in how to kind of institute these demand signals.
Yes, definitely. And Adebayo, looking at now let's suppose, right, in a perfect world, we suppose that the agreement works, Africa can become one, all the infrastructure problems are fixed, and all our culture kind of mix up together. Do you think we will be then a global power player, or do you still think that there's still forces that are working against us, even if
There,
all the base conditions are there?
there's always going to be forces working against us. It's just the way it's the nature of the world. Every current country, what has some forces working against them. Yes, if everything is all said and good, everything, all the road networks, everything's all interconnected and all, we're still gonna have challenges. We're still gonna have corruption. We're still gonna have, if we don't have visionary leaders across the continent, it's still gonna hamper growth. But I don't think they'll be able to pull off the F-style if you don't have visionary leaders in place, because you take a visionary to see the end from the beginning.
True.
So you're going to take a lot of visionary leaders across the landscape of the continent to be able to pull this off, and it's doable. It's doable. If we kind of jettison our own personal interest and look at the communal interest, what Africa looks and look like, everybody look at it from, before these boundaries of countries, African trades with each other.
True.
And of this after is reversing back to our old ways. People used to come from now Mali to trade in now Nigeria. Nobody told them, because we weren't in the country then, we're in different kingdoms and caliphates and all those kind of things then. But our first interaction with the rest of the world is to trade. So we've always been the trader by nature.
Yeah.
African traders by nature. So I don't see this thing being a Herculean task to accomplish, but self-interest is going to be in the way. People being stubborn is going to be in the way. People who want to act alone is going to be the way, which is very, very synonymous to Africa. And if we don't have serious leadership, visionary leadership, it's going to be extremely hard to pull it off. But all things being equal, if, we're still going to have challenges, leader corruption and all this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
as you advance in nation building and all, you're always going to have different challenges. Our challenges is not going to be as what it was like 20 years ago. Some more advanced and, different. Let me put it that way.
Yes, true. And just to pick up, I liked what you said in terms of leadership. It starts with the head. If our leadership is not with the right mindset and with
Mm-hmm.
the right vision, it's pointless, even if all things are considered equal. That's why you see sometimes people who won the lottery they're not the next millionaires. They fall broke after a couple of years. So it's about the mentality that you go with. It's about the spirit that you go with when you're engaging with your country's men, when you're engaging with other African countries and other African economies, in order to put the Africa first, putting the trade first rather than personal needs. And just to going even to my last questions in terms of for supply chain professionals at Adebayo, you have this global perspective. What do you see some of the trends that supply chain professionals have to look at now, that as we are moving as a world, we are coming out of the pandemic of COVID-19. So what are some of the trends that you think supply chain professionals should look at, and some opportunities that are open to in that sense, especially here in Africa?
So first of all, I will challenge every supply chain professionals out there on the continent to always um, understand trends. The reason why a lot of these things are caught off guard is I'm a supply chain risk management person, and every organization that I've been to in America and other parts of the world, there's always lacking in supply chain risk management. Despite the fact that you live in an advanced world or you operate in an advanced economy, that doesn't mean that they do the right thing every time. Absolutely not. And if a lot of businesses are closing down in advanced economies because they didn't take supply chain risk management serious, then what are we going to write off about Africa?
Hmm.
Supply chain risk management, I believe every professional out there should know about it, should take it serious, able to anticipate what can happen, so you can posture your your client, your customer alike in a better light, because anything can go south in like a minute.
Yeah.
You know, it can go really south. Understanding if this thing happen, what are the ripple effect of it? If this thing happen in Pakistan, the flooding in Pakistan, how is it affecting movements of goods and services in Africa? All these things are interconnected, and I
Yeah.
think that's what because I need to challenge my fellow supply chain colleagues on the continent to Africa is very very it's very unpredictable, and the uncertainty in the world in Africa presents challenge, also presents opportunities as well. So we need to kind of challenge ourselves. How can we kind of foresee these challenges ahead of time so that we can tap into the opportunities that they are in? So that's what I want to challenge everyone to. If you can get ahead on supply chain risk management, everything else will come clear to you.
Yes, and it's very important to have that component so you're not caught off guard. I know sometimes with some of the strategies they're top down. So the head office says that you should do this, this, and that, and we forget that element that our subsidiary or our specific African countries different than the head office. They may have a strategy, but how do you implement that strategy according to your country's culture, according to your country specific needs, according to the issues and challenges that are facing your country? So it's very important to have that in mind. And one of the things as well in terms of the trends I guess supply chain professionals can also look at is education. Get yourself educated, get yourself acquainted with what is happening around us. In supply chain, what I love about is that it's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. So what was happening in 2015, yes, there's principles that don't change, but there is the movable factors that are changing constantly. We see now the increase in data in terms of digital transformation and data management and Bitcoin and blockchain. More and more African countries are adopting that. So it's something that we need to keep on the lookout in terms of what is happening in our industry. Yes, we have the challenges that are happening in our country, but what is happening out there? Get yourself acquainted with that. So it's very important in terms of touching that. And Adebayo, just some closing remarks. What is some of your word of encouragement in terms of what we have been talking about? And could you please talk about some of the work that you're currently doing now?
Yes, I'm focused on supply chain Africa as my baby, and myself and everyone that is for there. We are working day in, day out to get quality content. And more importantly, is to be able to get the right footing for African supply chain. So upcoming, we're going to be bringing what we call supply chain digital network, supply chain Africa digital network. I've talked to you about it to connect all professionals on the continent. I estimated we have over 100 million supply chain professionals on the continent. It's on top. This digital network is going to allow people to post jobs, to allow people to able to educate. We're going to provide education from different countries. Mozambique, for example, have there's some supply chain education that is very centric to that. All the SADC countries, we provide those kind of things. And the reason why this is very necessary is our march towards professionalization of supply chain on the continent.
Yes.
And wear with a badge of honor, and we can understand that we run the world. So, and that's one thing. And we're working on a lot of things to kind of put African supply chain, to kind of decolonize it in certain area, and also to make aggressive and more attractive to the rest of the world, because the African supply chain get its acts together. The African trade is going to follow through, and the African trade follow through. The world is going to be put on notice. So that is what we're doing in our hands. So I'm trying to encourage all supply chain professionals, my colleagues out there, continue to push on. I know oftentimes our job is very thankless. Nobody really cares, or oftentimes, or don't care how this thing gets to your door. But we know what you do. We know the importance of your work. and continue to do it. And the reward will surely come. The reward will surely come. Thank you for all that you do on the continent. Thank you, Stella, for having me on your podcast. I don't take this kind of invite lightly, because you never know who's listening, and you never know who you might be kind of challenging or speaking to out there. And for all that are listening that they don't even know what the supply chain is, just give it a try, read about it, and see that once you get in, I can guarantee you your life will never remain the same again. So, thank you all. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for listening.
Yes. So thank you so much, Adebayo, for being on YASP. And one of the things that I like about you is that you always try to bring supply chain professionals together. You're always trying to bring them together and connecting all over Africa and getting them connected to what is happening around. And I extremely appreciate that about you. And Adebayo, just to finalize, how can people get in touch with you if they want to talk with you and to get to know a little bit more of what you do?
I'm a LinkedIn guy. Adebayo Adeleke is on LinkedIn. Check me out, engage me on there. I'm on Instagram as Adebayo1, like numeral 1. And that's pretty much all. And I'm on Twitter too as Adebayo Adeleke, Temibayo as well. So I'm on Twitter. So yeah, chat up with me. I'm very engaged on my social media outlet, and let's talk Africa. Let's talk African supply chain. Let's talk about war. Let's talk about humanity. I engage in people on different side of things. So again, I really do appreciate you all, and you too, Stella. You guys are awesome.
Thank you. So thank you everyone who has listened to the podcast. Make sure that you rate, subscribe, like the content, and also write reviews. That helps in terms of getting our content out there and also getting know about what is happening in our supply chain industry. So I hope you enjoyed it, and see you on the next episode.